Welcome back to the final dashboard of Project Pulse. In the last lesson, we looked at a fully merchant structure without any downside protection. In this lesson, we will add a revenue put option, or RPO, and see how that changes the case. Let me switch the dashboard from case 11, 2-hour pure merchant, to case 15, 1-hour merchant with a 20% haircut and a revenue put option. From a structural standpoint, this is important. A fully merchant project is usually very hard to finance with debt, because lenders don't like unbounded downside risk. The RPO gives us a revenue floor, so the BESS can still participate fully in upside merchant prices, but lenders are protected against downside risk. That's what makes this structure bankable. If you're new to this Deal Lab series, I recommend starting with part 1, where you can download the model start file for free and build the model alongside me. Link is in the video description below. We are still in monetization pillar 2 of the case study, now in the right-hand column, 1-hour merchant plus RPO. We assume a 1-hour 200 megawatt BESS and we split capacity as follows. 55% of the AC capacity is allocated to merchant auxiliary services, and 45% is allocated to merchant arbitrage. So the project is still fully merchant in terms of revenue sources, arbitrage plus auxiliary services. But we overlay this merchant revenue with a revenue put option to give lenders a minimum revenue level on a portion of the capacity. The key RPO features you see here are a strike level of $9.25 per kilowatt month, an option premium of $1.25 per kilowatt month that we pay for the protection, and a hedged capacity, in our case 100 megawatts, which is 50% of total capacity. All of which translates into a minimum annual revenue that this option is designed to guarantee. Now let's jump into the model checkpoint file from our previous lesson and look at the RPO block. Make sure to switch to case 15. You can see that all RPO inputs are already populated. The start after COD is set to 0, so the protection kicks in right away. We have a contract term of 15 years, matching the financing tenor, which we will model in a later lesson. And we also have the strike price and the premium we pay, as well as the hedged capacity in megawatts and the hedged percentage of total capacity. And finally, a minimum annual RPO revenue that represents the floor we want to guarantee on that hedged capacity. We are not changing any of these inputs in this lesson. They come from the term sheet or the hedge provider. But it's important that you understand what each of them represents before we build the mechanics. On the inputs time dependent sheet, the RPO is very simple. We only need one time series input, the RPO settlement index forecast. This is a projected index price per kilowatt month that comes from the independent market price consultant. In reality, this index is usually some average of market prices over the settlement period, and is often only a close proxy to what the project will actually generate in revenues. In the model, we just take this forecast curve and use it to compute any payouts the project would receive under the option at each settlement period. Now on the operations sheet, we will actually implement the RPO. And as always, the first thing we will do is pull in our flag in row 242. And to do this, we will pick up our flag from our previous lesson where we covered merchant auxiliary services. So hit Ctrl C here, pick up this flag, Ctrl V, F2, and let's make sure that we get the on-off switch reference right. So let's drag this one up here, the time references are right. Hit enter, drag this one over, Ctrl R. And unlike for our other flags, here we only have 15 years of RPO term because this will match our actual financing tenor. And then the next thing we will pull in is our actual hedged capacity. Because we will only hedge 50% of our total capacity, it's important that we pull in the hedged capacity. And this is gonna be this input from here, the 100 megawatt AC. Let's fully anchor this with F4. Let's multiply it by 1000 because this input is given in megawatts, but the raw unit reads kilowatts. So let's multiply by 1000 And last but not least, we'll also multiply this with our flag that we just modeled. Hit F4 2 times, enter, drag it over, Control R. So here we have 100,000 kilowatts AC hedged for 15 years. Then the next thing we will have to pull in is our RPO price. And that is actually the reference to our settlement index estimate from our inputs time dependent sheet. So we will look this up with an XLOOKUP again. Type XLOOKUP. We will look up our calendar year in K4, comma, go to the lookup array, which we have right here in row 123. Select all of these guys, hit F4, and comma, the reference vector is the vector right underneath. Make sure you pick it up from column L to AT. Hit F4 again, comma 0 if not found, and exact match 0. Hit enter. And now let's hit F2 and actually multiply this also with our flag up here and hit enter. Drag this one over, Control R. And this is essentially the price forecast that we get from our market provider, who is saying that, for instance, in the first year, we will make 7.1 USD per kilowatt AC month on a merchant basis. So this is just referring to some benchmark index. And what will happen in this period is that we will have a strike price of 925, which means that if actual revenue falls below our strike price, which would be the case in the first year, then the revenue put option will make up the difference between strike price and actual price. So here we would expect a payout because our actual revenue would be much lower than the expected strike price. So this is essentially an insurance product which provides a lot of comfort to lenders, knowing that these price differentials would actually make up for any cash shortfalls. Now it's important to mention that this RPO settlement index might only be a proxy of actual merchant revenues, meaning that if we forecast a merchant revenue of 7.1 kilowatt per month, that does not necessarily mean that actual revenue will actually match this index. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And it's even more important to have an option structured in such a way and linked to such an index that this index here is actually a good proxy for the actual revenue generated by the project. Because if this is not a good proxy, it's more or less just a randomized insurance and wouldn't provide a lot of comfort to lenders. But now let's implement the mechanics. And to do that, let's hop into K246. And this is going to be our strike price. So let's pick up our strike price, which we'll fully anchor with F4. And we will multiply this with our hedge capacity, because the hedge capacity is in kilowatt AC and the strike price is in dollars per kilowatt AC per month, which means that we also have to multiply by months per year and then divide by 1,000, because right here the output is going to be in thousands USD. Hit enter, drag it over, Control R. And this is essentially a minimum revenue of 11.1 million USD that our project would expect in each respective year. And our reference revenue from the price proxy index is going to be modeled right underneath. And this is going to equal to, again, our hedged capacity times our RPO price. And then we will have to multiply this by months here again and divide by 1,000. Control R, drag it over. And this is essentially the actual revenue according to our RPO index forecast. And you can see that this might generate a revenue shortfall in certain years, such as the first 2 years. Our expected revenue is actually below our minimum revenue, which means we have to model our revenue shortfall, and this is going to equal to if our reference revenue in row 247 is smaller than our minimum revenue in 246, then, comma, we want the reference revenue minus our minimum revenue. Actually, that should be the other way around. That should be our minimum revenue minus our reference revenue, so that we receive a positive number. Otherwise, it should be 0. Close parentheses, hit enter, and let's drag this one over, Control R. And you can see that in certain years, we indeed expect a payout. In the first year, that would be 2.5 million. In the second year, 2 million. And that essentially just means that lenders can have comfort in knowing that we would always at least get 11.1 million in revenues. And if actual revenues fall below that, then our revenue put option would make up for that difference. And of course, hedging or protections are never free. So the premium that is due under the option, which we have seen in our IAM, is going to be modeled separately in our OPEX section in one of our upcoming lessons. So in the overall cash flow statement later on, you will actually see two effects. You will see a cost for the premium paid every year, and also a potential benefit from the payouts in low price years, such as 2026 and 2027. And to wrap things up, let's only model now our actual RPO payout, which is an annual top-up. And that's going to be equal to the minimum of our revenue shortfall right here and our RPO minimum revenue. And we take the minimum here because we assume that our option will not pay out anything beyond this minimum revenue. So if for whatever reason the RPO index would turn negative, then we would only get paid out $11.1 million per year. And that is an assumption that our option in this case study is just structured this way. So close parentheses, hit enter, and let's drag this one over to the right. Control R. And you can see that the overall RPO payouts to ensure our minimum revenue threshold will be roughly 10.6 million USD over the full option lifetime. Now in practice, RPOs can be more complex than our simple implementation here. Settlement might be on a monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, or annual basis, which is assumed here. Some contracts also include recapture, which we do not assume here, where the provider can claw back part of the previous payouts if prices later recover. And as mentioned previously, the exact index definition can vary by project and market. For the sake of the case study, we ignore those extra details and focus on the core economics, a paid-for guarantee that lifts merchant revenues up to a defined floor on the hedge capacity. Let's recap the lesson with the final dashboard of the model in mind. In this lesson, we kept the project fully merchant on arbitrage and auxiliary services, but we overlaid an RPO to give lenders a downside revenue floor on 100 megawatts of capacity during the financing term. In the revenue sources chart, you can see the minor RPO payouts in orange. And in the next lesson, we will take a step back and summarize all revenue streams from the previous lessons: contracted, merchant, auxiliary services, and the RPO top-ups, and see how they flow into the integrated financial statements and ultimately drive the project's returns and credit metrics. Alright guys, see you there.